I did want to start with you have represented Colorado House District 50 before. What inspired you to run again?
In 2015, the state created a strategic action planning group on aging.
Mhm.
I have a master's degree in gerontology and have been working in the aging network for about 25 years. The governor appointed me to that board, and at the second meeting I was elected the chair, and I served as the chair for about 2.5 years. Looking at the changing demographics in Colorado and how we need to make an action plan for the state, municipalities, and counties to work with. In the 2017 legislative session, I had an opportunity to testify on a number of bills and realized that I still knew the system very well. I had a lot of knowledge and background. I know how to get bills passed. And I saw that in a current political climate, maybe there was a need for some mentorship and a need for some people with experience to help kind of lead the way and work through the partisanship that was going on down there, and maybe set a different example for the way legislation and government can operate. So I decided that it was an open seat. The seat has not been open since 1996, which means there was no incumbent running, and so it was an excellent opportunity to get back into the system. It was kind of a surprise to me.
We'll start with transportation. This is one that's been kind of at the top of folks' minds for the past few years. The Colorado legislature recently passed Senate Bill 1, allocating hundreds of millions of dollars toward transportation projects and setting the stage for a bond issue in 2019. Did you support the legislation, and do you think it's enough?
Well, it's certainly not enough money, but you never have enough, I don't think. We have a lot of challenges. Recently, it took me at 10 o'clock in the morning 20 minutes to go on Highway 34 from County Road 15 to County Road 13. Just because of traffic, there were no accidents or anything. We enjoy the mountains. Sometimes it's a 2-hour trip, and sometimes it's a 4. But I also have an issue that we continue in transportation to only focus on moving cars. And I believe we need to focus on moving people. And so in many cases, I like to talk about mobility instead of transportation, because mobility means how do we get people from where they are to where they need to be and by where they want to be. So while there are things we can do to help move cars, I think mass transit and those other areas are just as important as looking at just adding more lanes. We need to move people, and many people, I think, are ready now to get out of their cars and find other ways to get from one spot to another.
The Colorado legislature also passed a bill that will transition to education here. The Colorado legislature also passed a bill that cuts retirement benefits for teachers and other public employees. Did you support that legislation? Why or why not? This would be the para bill.
So if you're talking about PERA, they did raise the age limit, I believe, from 62 to 64. They increased contributions from both the employees and the employers. PERA was looking at about an 8% annual increase, which they've not been able to achieve. I don't personally feel that it was in as much peril as some of the others did, but it did need some changes to be made. I believe that PERA is a very good program for the people in Colorado who are on it. I believe it needs to stay as a defined benefit program and not be changed to a defined contribution program. And I will continue to support efforts to keep it as a defined benefit program and to make sure that it stays strong. We need to keep it strong. So I can appreciate what they did, but will do everything I can to make sure that it maintains that it's not going to run out for the people who will be counting on it and who have no other means, because many of those same people do not have Social Security to fall back
on. Drilling down into K through 12 education, you're probably familiar with there's always unfinished business when it comes to the legislature. But I think probably a particular thorn in the side of Representative Dave Young the man you'd replace at the state legislature, is the inability to do something about K through 12 funding, despite about 2 years' work by Colorado superintendents on a new funding formula. Does the K-12 education funding formula need to be changed, in your opinion? And if Young's bill wasn't the right approach, how would you approach it?
Well, it does need to be changed, and I'm not sure it was the wrong approach. It didn't get through. He ended up pulling it because they weren't ready to do that particular battle. But it's also tied to a ballot initiative. And should the ballot initiative pass this fall, then 1232 would come back next year, because the two are tied directly together. So we will see that opportunity again. When I think of education, I really like to make it P through 16 when we're talking about preschool through college. And we have done a number of things in the past 10 years in Colorado that made it very difficult, and even longer than that, when it used to be public schools were primarily funded by local taxes. And the state was putting in about 60%, local taxes were putting in about 40%, and now it's flip-flopped. And locals putting in just under 40%, just over 60%, and the state funding is only about 38%. And so that's really an issue. And many of our districts don't have the tax base to raise locally the number of dollars that are involved. But we also need to look at the curriculum. So we're seeing a lot of fights right now about teacher salaries in Pueblo and in other states around the country, but we also need to look at the curriculum, that the students have the opportunity to get the classes that they need to go into the future. We need to really look at more trade schools. We need to look at bringing the arts back into the programs. We talk a lot about STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. We need to get the arts back in. I want to change STEM to STEAM so that we can give students a broader background so they can really enjoy having a quality of life. We need to do something, but we can't lose a whole generation of students while we're trying to fix this problem. We need to find ways right away, but we do have finite limitations on what we can do. We did some of that with some bills a number of years ago, but then we started peeling money back off of that and putting it into other sources, the budget stabilization package. And that's what House Bill 1232 was trying to get to, that we look at the true factors that districts have to work with. We made good strides here in District 6 with the mill levy override in the last election, but that's just one of many things we're going to have to do to protect our students and to give them the quality of education that they deserve.
Definitely. I'm glad you touched on, it comes back to students when we talk about money and that sort of thing. There are real lives, young lives impacted. Let's talk about grades 13 through 16. As you said, it seems like tuition has never been higher in higher education, and it saddles more students with more debt every year. Is there a way to address higher education funding, and how would you approach it, or what are your thoughts on that?
The whole problem is the funding picture in general. And so then you get back to a very difficult discussion about Tabor and Gallagher, two things that are the three-legged stool that really defines how we fund things in the state of Colorado. And we're going to have to look at those in order to utilize the resources that we have in Colorado. If you look at the numbers, Colorado economically should be one of the top states, and yet we have the lowest number of dollars that we're putting into universities and into K-12 public education. So we have to look at how we can better utilize those dollars, how we can have the dollars that are necessary. But we also have to look at, it's not just money. A lot of people, when I knock on doors, say we keep giving them more money and nothing changes. But the reality is that things do change. But the public schools particularly, and many of the colleges, are not really sharing with the public the great strides that they're making and the things that they're doing and the quality of students that they're turning out and the programs that they're making available. But we also need to look at not just the four-year colleges, but we need to look at the two-year colleges, and we need to look at the trade schools, because today one of the greatest difficulties that we have in the hiring process is the trade schools. They simply cannot hire the people who have the training that they need. And those are good, well-paying jobs. A lineman today goes to work in a power company, can, after 4 years of an apprenticeship, be making $90,000 a year. We need to look at those types of programs as well. And those are programs that they're not going to, when they graduate from a 4-year program, they're not broke. They've been working the whole time. They paid for their education, and they have a good job too. So we need to look at all of the things that are necessary in creating jobs in Colorado, how we need to educate people to fill those jobs, and how we attract people. But we also need to tell the story of the things that the schools are accomplishing.
Definitely. You mentioned Tabor, so I'll skip down. I did want to address that. Democrats have long lamented the taxpayer Bill of Rights, pointing to the disconnect between a booming Colorado economy and a government that struggles to fund some services, including infrastructure and education. Where do you stand on Tabor, and what's the solution?
Well, the problem with Tabor is that when Tabor was passed, there were a lot of different things that were in it. And once it passed, they realized that they never wanted to have legislation like that again, so we passed the one subject rule. So now new changes to our Constitution have to be a single subject. New laws that are presented in the legislature have to be a single subject. So fixing Tabor is very difficult because you can't just wipe it out. You can only do it one little item at a time. And there are so many items in Tabor that it's hard. There have been some attempts on a city level. Many of the cities have, quote the term they use, deep roost. The difficulty with Tabor is that when you have a recession, it's hard to get back up to where you were. There have been some amendments that have helped shield that in the past, but we're not in the position where we can do the things that might be necessary. And the real goal behind Tabor was that people should have an opportunity to vote if their taxes are going up. But Tabor involves so many more things than just that. But many people today are very concerned that as Colorado has grown economically, many of them have not, and they've not seen these great gains. So they are very fearful of voting for something that they feel is going to increase their taxes. So we need to look at those provisions of Tabor that we can, so as we grow, we can ratchet up instead of ratchet down.
Would you be an advocate for water issues at the state capitol? And if so, what would be your approach to the various issues, or what do you think are the key issues?
Well, one of the things that I've been very positive about in the past was creating additional storage for the water that we have in Colorado. There are a lot of complicated water rights that you can only keep a certain amount of water. Water flows through Colorado. Colorado is one of the few states, and maybe the only state in the country, where we have no rivers coming in. All of the water in Colorado leaves Colorado at some point. We need to be able to keep as much water as we're allowed to. And the only way we can do that is to have greater storage facilities to hold that water back instead of flowing out of the state, where we would have a right to use it. We have some issues also with well drilling in Weld County, where a number of wells were shut off, and now the water level is rising, and we have homes that are being flooded and fields that can't be used because there's too much water because of the rising water table. I also have a feeling that in Colorado, many people believe that it's when water puddles somewhere because of rain or snowfall, that's their water. And to me, water in Colorado belongs to all of the people of Colorado. And so I don't have the problem that some people have with diverting water. If we had not diverted water to Weld County, we would not have the prosperous farming and agricultural county that we have today. So I don't have the same issue that some people have in diverting water from the western slope where it gathers to the eastern slope where it can be used better. But we all need to conserve better when it comes to water. And I also have an issue with third-party water brokers now who are buying water not for their own use, but just to hold it until the price goes up and then sell it to somebody else. And I would certainly like to look at what we can do in Colorado to stem that tide toward third-party brokers just buying water and reselling it to the highest bidder.
All right, we're going to jump around a little bit, so I hope not to make you nauseated. Do you believe Colorado needs to do more when it comes to gun control?
Colorado made some good strides. I have no problem with the licensing that people have. I believe that it's a little too easy for the concealed carry. I am concerned of some of the places where now people can carry a weapon in certain public places. We have a problem, and I know they say that guns don't kill people, people kill people, but it's people with guns who kill people. And I have some concerns about some of the types of rifles that people can buy. I have some concerns that you can buy at 18, a very powerful multi-shot rifle, but you have to wait to 21 to buy a pistol. I think we should have a law that would be the same for those people who can buy those. And so I believe that we have a lot of hunters and we have a lot of good people who own guns and use them responsibly. But I also believe that we should have the ability to make sure that people who do have guns use them responsibly and do have the training that's necessary. And there's an issue that many people, they say, well, if you have children in the home, then you should have a safety on it, and you should have your gun locked in a safe that the children can't get to. And then they tell us that I'm using that to protect myself in case somebody breaks into my home. Well, I mean, those two don't go along. If it's in a safe that you have to open, you can't use it to protect yourself. So we have to look at what's the real use of guns and how do we keep young people from having access to guns from the number of shooting incidents we see every year. So we need to certainly look at that and determine what are some sensible rules that we can use so that people can own guns, people can use guns, and yet we don't have the number of killings that we have taking place today. And some people say, well, you need to forget about the guns and just talk about the mental health. You need to have a combined program. You need to talk about the guns. You need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about the needs that people have. And it's not something that I will run away from if someone is looking at, do we need to establish them? I'll certainly take a look at that and see what makes sense. But no one, hardly anyone is talking about confiscating guns, which is always the argument on the other side. They're coming to get our guns. I'm not coming to get anybody's guns. But I do want to make sure that we're very sensible about the way we license them, the way that we allow them to be concealed, the way that they're used, and the quantity and quality of firearms that people have for either hunting or self-protection.
You introduced House Bill 1293, I believe, in 2009. That was the one that created the hospital provider fee that generated so many headlines during the 2017 legislative session. Given the fixes that the legislature made to that last year, was the bill a mistake, or can you explain how that worked?
Oh, it was a wonderful bill. In fact, the hospitals were looking at the total amount of dollars that they could not collect on bills, the uncompensated services that they were providing. And they said, we're having a huge problem with Medicare, or medical expenses, and we want to be part of that solution. So the hospitals put up $600 million between them, and they put it into a fund to use for Medicaid. And in Colorado, the federal government matches whatever we have in that fund. So we collected an additional $600 million from the federal government that now we could use to extend our services. And the original $600 million the hospitals put in was then redistributed back to the hospitals to help pay their uncompensated expenses. Some got more back than they put in, some got a little less back than they put in. Weld County was one of the, and Banner Hospital here in Greeley was one of the hospitals that had the greatest amount of uncompensated care, and they came out very well because of that bill. And it allowed us in our state to continue to expand the Medicaid coverages. It never was intended to be a part of the general fund. It was intended to be pass-through money. And what happened in the last couple of years was there was a battle of where that money really belonged. But the result of it is that because of that money coming in, we've been able to greatly expand the number of people in Colorado who now have access. They have more insurance coverages. The hospitals have a lower rate of uncompensated care. They're being able to provide better care. So all around, it's been a very good thing. Some people didn't understand exactly how it worked and what it was intended to do, but the results have been extremely positive, and most hospital systems all around the state were able to expand their operations and their services because of the money which was now coming in to replace the uncompensated care they were forced to provide.
I appreciate that explanation. I want to move on to jumping around a little more. Do you believe Colorado has strong enough rules and regulations on oil and gas? If not, what would you like to see?
One of the problems that we have is one size fits all. And that's an improvement that I would like to see happen. Is we have to change the regulation by which we work. And so some people say, well, we should set limits on how close you can build to a house, how close you can build to a school. And some say it's 1,000 feet, and some say it's 2,500 feet. And the people that say it's 2,500 feet, that's half a mile. And that if you can't drill within a half a mile of any habitable structure, then you can not drill in Colorado. So those are some issues, but we need to, I think, rather than having one size fits all.
Okay, we're back. You were talking about an issue with oil and gas, and they're not being a fan of the one-size-fits-all approach. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I believe that there are certain circumstances that 1,000 feet may be enough away. If a farmer wants to lease his ground and he wants to have it right outside his barn or right outside his house, why should not he have that right if that's what he wants to do? Around a school, perhaps it needs to be further because of the noise and the fumes and the other things that can come off, and the number of trucks and other transport depending on how they move the product and how they move the water in and out and the things that they need to do. I believe that the local communities should have greater say in what's happening in their communities. I believe it was just the last day or so where Longmont was able to work with an oil and gas company and say, don't drill in we'll pay you not to drill in our area, and I believe that they're going to make that happen. We have a number of regulations, and many people tell you, oh, it's the most regulated state in the country, but the regulations don't seem to be evenly applied. And I think if we're going to have regulations, they need to be enforced. And if they're not enforced, then we should either enforce them or change the regulation to something that can be. But I do believe we need to have not just one state position, but we need to look at the communities, we need to look at the other efforts, we need to look at the things that are going on in the community, we need to look at how much water is flowing, we need to look at where the wind currents are taking fumes that they escape, and are they going to tend to go back over your city or go back over somebody else's. There's a lot of things we need to look at and make sure that people are treated the same, but people have an opportunity, and that we include in the regulations, and this is one of the things right now, the health and safety of the people in the area. And we have to look at what's happening with air and water and those types of things. And are we seeing increases of cancer? Are we seeing increases of asthma? Are we seeing increases of lung disease in those areas where we do have some pollutants that come off of those? And the other major concern that I have is we had right here in Greeley a worker who was from a rig who was brought into the emergency room and had some of the solution spilled on him. They had to cut his clothes off, and the nurse then was also contaminated in the emergency room, and the company would not divulge what the chemicals were because they said it was proprietary information. And I think if we're going to have a lot of fracking, that one of the things that we need to be able to look at is what are these chemicals that are being used, and in case of accidents, how do we combat the toxicity that's going to be caused by the use of those. And anything that's pumped into the ground, I think sooner or later has the opportunity to come back up. And I know it's encased down a long ways, but once they get it down there, they're pumping it into the ground. And we've had cases right here in Weld County where water coming out of a kitchen tap could be set on fire. That's just not right.
In 2018, the Colorado legislature was rocked by accusations of sexual harassment. Um, what was your reaction to those developments, including Representative Steve Lebsock's ouster and then inaction on the part of Republicans in the Colorado Senate?
Well, apparently they just not have good rules. They could not agree on what they were going to do. Unfortunately, it wasn't a new situation. Years ago, they went in and put camera or panic buttons on the desks of all the women legislators because they were being harassed even by some other elected officials, and they wanted them to be able to push a button and get help if it was required. And we've seen it nationally in position, not just in government, but in business and entertainment. It seems to be an issue, and I think we need to establish what the rules are, what the regulations are, and whenever there is a charge, how it's going to be handled. And it needs to be handled swiftly, and then the proper punishment needs to be taken. It's quite interesting that on the federal level, every time someone is accused, they always say, "I didn't do it," but they quit. And so, let's have some regulations. Let's put some teeth in it. No one, male or female, deserves to be harassed, and we need to have regulations on how we're going to handle it.
Definitely. Colorado, along with other states, has been targeted by President Donald Trump's administration for so-called sanctuary cities. What are your thoughts on the federal government's stance or approach here? And is there anything you would do or you could do at the state legislature?
I think we really have to do whatever we can to preserve the ability for those students who are currently in DACA to continue with their program, to get the education that they deserved. I was at the university for a conference, and the young lady who was speaking did exceptionally well in high school. She had a 4-year scholarship to CU. Because she was DACA, she couldn't use it. She ended up coming to UNC, and she's graduating with honors. Those students, the federal government knows who they are, they know where they are, they know where they live, and they pay $500 every 2 years for the right to continue in that program. I think we need to find every way we can to support it, either on a state level or on a federal level. You hear about sanctuary cities, but in almost every case, those people are living under the letter of the federal law. And in many cases, even speaking to Sheriff Reams here in Weld County, that they're living under law, and in some cases ICE is doing some things that are not under the law. They're doing some things that they may not have the legal right to do, but they're acting in that way. And in most cases, the legal community in Colorado seems to know the law very well and are only doing those things that are absolutely necessary. And I certainly support that.
Definitely. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything you'd like to tell voters or that they should know about you or your record? The floor is yours.
Well, I think I have a record that I'm very proud to stand on. I served in the legislature for 7 years, left 1 year early only because the governor appointed me to be the insurance commissioner for the state of Colorado. I came to Greeley, born and reared in Denver. Met my wife here in Greeley. We were married in Greeley. We have 2 children. They were both born in Greeley. We have 5 grandchildren. 4 of them were born here in Greeley. And in my time in Greeley, I've served on a number of boards and institutions. I began out of college as a junior high school teacher at Heath and at John Evans. I've been on profit and nonprofit boards in our community, so I've worked very hard for the people in Greeley. I know a lot about the history of this community, the programs and services that are here for folks, and I've worked diligently to improve the quality of life for all the people throughout Greeley. District 50 is the east half of Greeley, Evans, and Garden City, but for all of the people in Greeley and in Weld County. And I'm proud of the service that I've provided for them, and I think I understand the needs. And someone said, well, we have a certain percentage of Hispanic people, we have a certain percentage of kids, a certain percentage of women, and I don't feel you have to be any one of those to represent them. And I feel that I've represented the people in District 50 with an even hand. And during the legislative sessions for 7 years, I held town meetings every other Saturday. I've held hundreds of town meetings to keep the people informed about what was going on. And I think the most important thing is I've always kept by my word and stuck by my values and my ethics. When people were opposed to something, a position, or they wanted me to take a stand differently than the one I was taking, I always explained to them why I took it and what evidence I had and by what principles I made my decision. And I think that that's what a statesman needs to do in representing the people, so they know what he stands for and how he will make decisions. And my dad always told me, if you always tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said. And so that's always my goal, to tell the truth and then live by my words.